Hey there, members of the Night Crew, and folks who just love horror. Welcome to the Night Crew podcast, where shadows breathe and monsters listen. This is the podcast where we get cozy with the creepy, the frightening, and the just plain undead. I'm your host, Brad Ricks. On today's episode, I talked with author EM Otero. He's the author of What the Witch Moth Brings and the Howling Between Worlds. We talk mecha horror, his unique take on vampire lore, and his job, which is definitely a job for a horror writer. Down to the virtual studio we go.
All right, so joining me today in the virtual studio, I have Eric Otero. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very good.
All right. Oh, so I know you've been writing for how long? How long have you been writing?
Years. My first attempt at a novel, I was like 20, so like that was 10 years ago, if you can count that. But professionally, like the last couple years, like we were just talking about, me and you both share a first publication date in now Bainham Books Press body horror anthology as the first ever thing I could put on my credit.
That was mine as well. I happened to stumble across a post and I was like, I think I could do a body horror. That sounds fun. And yeah, I wrote something and they picked it up. And yeah, I was excited too because it was the first time I had my name in a book. I was like, yay.
Yeah, it is exciting. And the only reason I put in for that body horror, I was like, I could probably do something, I guess, was I was putting my current novel, The Howling Between Worlds, on Royal Road to kind of like, I guess, beta test it to see if people actually liked it, if it was something that, you know, because it's a science fiction mecha horror, and at the time there was nothing like that, like nothing. You could search it all you want, zero. So I was kind of just trying it out there. I met Dan Schrader. He was also writing horror and putting it on there, and he was like, hey, I got my stuff on this press. They do anthologies and stuff. Why don't you try submitting? And the body horror was my second one, and I got in, and it's been progressive since there.
Now, has all your stuff been through Bainham, or have you bounced around to other publishers as well?
All my long work has been through Bainham. I've gotten short stories published in other places and other anthologies on other podcasts, but I had the last thing I had published was my collection, and that's the last long work I've done. And I've been kind of wanting to get back into that again.
Gotcha. Okay. So tell us a little bit about your work. So I know you said that the first short story, of course, was a body horror anthology. But other than that, tell us about some of your other works. What repertoire?
So what really got me writing was I wanted to write what I was not finding, which was like mecha books and mecha horror. I'm a huge Gundam fan. Anything mecha, like Pacific Rim, all of that stuff, love it.
Nice.
And of course, there's not much of that here in America. And I was like, well, paranormal romance wasn't really a thing until, Twilight took it off. And like, well, maybe I could be, the Stephanie Meyer of this genre. Don't think it's happened yet, but we're getting there. And the exciting thing about that book,
listeners to the Night Crew podcast will know how much I despise Twilight. So it's funny that you use that.
Yeah, my wife likes the movies, and I am always so mad that she creates a somewhat interesting world and focuses on the most uninteresting part of it. Like the whole the Confederacy using vampires in the Civil War, far more interesting. The ages long battle between the werewolves and all that, far more interesting. The crazy vampire cult that is coincides with the Vatican over there and all that, far more interesting than the teenage love triangle. But
but they sparkle.
Yeah, I love that it's still a thing on the internet where people are like, this is the skin of a killer over just random things. It's so memeable. It's great. If it's one thing that's contributed, but anyways.
Sorry for the sidebar. It's just you mentioned Twilight, and it's so
yeah.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say something. So continue. I'm sorry.
It's all good. So this wasn't something that was out there. I started writing it, and I got the book done, and then I realized the hardest part was getting it out there, getting it published, getting an editor. I saved up, spent some money on a good developmental editor, and had a couple proofreaders, and then I put it on Royal Road, and it got popular, popular enough that it was on the Rising Star and all of that. And then That's where I met Dan Schrader, put it out there. And yeah, so that was my first novel. It was pretty ambitious.
And what was the name of that one?
I spent The Howling Between Worlds.
The Howling Between.
Yep. A mecha horror novel. And it's a very complex, all that. And I'm actually going through it right now again with a narrator because it's being turned into an audiobook. So I'm reliving the whole process through that. And the guy's fantastic. And it's going to be kind of dramatized a little bit. There's sound effects and all of that, but we're trying not to go full audio drama, just enough to, give it a little seasoning in there, make it more palatable like that. But
yeah, no, it makes sense.
It's good.
So you mentioned the phrase, a developmental editor. So for those who are listening, would you like to explain a little bit about what a developmental editor helped you with?
Kind of like the structure and flow of a story and the narrative arcs and being like, okay, so the character is this way in the beginning and you want them to change this way at the end, like kind of stuff that you don't really think about when you're writing. You just have the full vision in your head and you might not get it onto the paper how you want, metaphorical paper because I typed everything, but and they just kind of help you with that. They help it feel like a story. And I think I learned a lot. Her name was Enchal Jane. Barry went through it with me like twice. All of that was a lot of money, but I think it was good money. I learned a lot, and I haven't felt like I really needed one since. And then I could be wrong, but so far everything seems to be doing all right. And then my second book was a vampire novella that I like weird vampire like stories, like unconventional ones, and I wanted to write one of prehistory. So I wrote, essentially, my vampire in this was a offshoot of human evolution when, there was all kinds of different ones, like Gigantopithecus, all that fell away to Homo sapiens. And this one was a obligate carnivore, or obligate cannibal. And they basically evolved to be the predator of humans in every possible way. So, they're way smarter, they're higher IQ, can, learn languages really quickly, and just the apex predator of humans. And they are so efficient at killing that they have to go into a torpor. They bury themselves and they go dormant for a while, and then they'll wake up and try and hunt again. If nothing's there, then they'll go into that dormant phase again, like a decade long hibernation. And I was trying to put evolutionary reasons behind a lot of the mythology. So I gave that for the cross thing. I tried to think of a way to incorporate that as being a weakness, because I basically created this kind of unkillable monster. And apex predators, and they tend to be small populations, and they tend to interbreed. And sometimes that can cause beneficial mutations. Sometimes it causes bad ones. And I basically had them interbreed and cause several defects, and that's the photosensitivity, where they don't burst into flames, but they start getting lesions and all of that. It messes with their eyesight, and that essentially they have a fault in their brain that when they see certain patterns, it sends them into epileptic fits, and that's right angles, and they don't really appear in nature at all, so that would not be a problem that would come up. But where this takes place in a caldera, there is a pyrite vein, and pyrite is square little cubes that look gold, and they can get fairly big sometimes. And so that kind of became the crux that they were able to use to kind of fend them off, is that this would send them into epileptic fix and make them vulnerable for a little bit.
Interesting. So that's definitely a very different take on when you talk about vampires and how the vampire evolved. A lot of it's always some kind of fallen angel or demon or something like that standpoint. So it's interesting. You look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, as they just took a different evolutionary track than what Homo sapiens took. So that's it.
Yeah, and I wanted it to kind of be a series of novellas. I haven't written another one yet. I've got a couple of drafts here and there, but nothing really solid yet. But I do plan on following my character in their crow, into his other vampire adventures, maybe other mythological creatures that I can somehow try and make sound grounded and rational.
Nice. Now, what was the name of that one?
That was the Night Hunters.
Night Hunters. Sure. Yeah.
I
haven't checked that one out. I'm going to have to, because I always love some good vampire stuff.
It's one of my favorites too. And that one's also available on Audible. The narrator for that's really good. And my last full work that I published is What the Witch Moth Brings in Other Localities, which is a collection and a novella in that. And that is stories that are kind of inspired of the area I live in, but also some of it is like culturally based. So I am Puerto Rican and I live in a very small, very white town. You know, that's a whole thing in itself. Growing up with being the brown kid in class can have its own, long lasting effects. And so a lot of the stories are kind of written with that little tilt on it. Some not so much. When I write a character that I don't describe, I always just picture them as Latino. So all of them are kind of under the assumption of that, where What the Witch Moth Brings is more focused on it. It's about a character who is Latino that is seeing these omens, and he is someone who is involved with organized crime and is reluctantly so. And he's trying to get out of it. And he's one of those characters he's not a bad guy, but he's done bad things. He keeps seeing these signs, and that's the witch moth, the black witch moth, which is a Mexican omen, and usually means death and all of that. You don't like them, and it's kind of a Crow style revenge, supernatural revenge story, but with the kind of Latino cultural bent, and it all takes place in the area I grew up.
Interesting. So kind of moving away from the actual books themselves, talking about a little bit of writing. So where do you find inspiration for your books?
It's sometimes really random. And in the back of my collection, I have author's notes where I kind of spell some of that out. But for certain stories, I know exactly what inspired it. Other ones, it's kind of an amalgam of things. And, like I said, with the Howling Between Worlds, that was me mixing a lot of things that I love into one book. The Night Hunters was me being well, there's never been a prehistory vampire and stuff like that. But so I listen to a lot of books and podcasts and all that. And sometimes I will hear something. I'm that's very interesting. And then that'll kind of stew in my mind. I'm I could probably write a story about that. Or one story, Pale Green Wings, which is about a man who's mourning his wife and lunar moth, a massive lunar moth in his house, and takes out his frustration on it. That kind of came almost full-fledged in 2 days. And I wrote it the evening after I had kind of the last epiphany there. And while I was at work, I found a lunar moth. So, they're really cool, they're big, all that. And I was explaining to a coworker, I was lunar moths, they don't live long because they spend their entire time as a caterpillar, eating up, getting all the fat stores and all that. And then when they turn into the moth, they don't have any working digestion or mouth parts. They're only there to mate. They live for maybe a week, 2 weeks, but that's their only purpose is to propagate. So as soon as they're in that beautiful shape, the countdown starts. It's just a matter of time before they die. And then I was at my mother's house with my daughter, and there's a tree in her backyard where my dad used to do target practice with his pistol. And it was a revolver and a 44, I believe, because the bullets are massive. He shot it so much that the tree had fallen over. And this was 25 years ago. And the bullets are still in there. You can still look at it and see the bullets littered all over it. And that imagery mixed with that kind of, I thought of a story about how to work those two together in a way. There's inspiration sparks in the most random places. There's a grave near the cemetery I take care of that has an epitaph that is, how does it go exactly? All animate mortals become inanimate. Here is proof. And I thought that was just a very very bleak and very I don't know. I thought it went real hard for an epitaph on a grave, and I looked it up because it had Mason symbolism on it. I was is this a common one? And I looked it up, and the epitaph there's a whole epitaph registry and all of that. I could not find any sources of it anywhere. Nothing that's referencing. I thought maybe it's biblical or something like that. Nothing, and that became in a story that I spawned around that. And I don't know, as a writer yourself, I'm sure it's sometimes like things just come out of thin air, fully fledged into your lap. And other times you're like, I have this premise, but I'm trying so hard to get the rest of it.
Nope,
You
not
really
at all.
want
I have a big bucket of ideas over here that I just randomly pull from all the time.
I'm kind of like that too. I don't have enough time to write all the ideas I have, but sometimes I'll have the idea and I'll start writing it, and I'm like, I'll kind of get a roadblock, and then I'll usually just go to my next idea and then finish that and come back. Like, I hop around a lot when I write, and especially since I've been doing a lot of short fiction in the last year, like it's a lot easier to kind of go from one 5,000 word story to another than to another between big projects.
Gotcha. So I do want to step back for a second because you said you take care of a cemetery. That sounds like the most horror writer profession I've ever heard in my life. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Okay, so it's a part of my job. I am a groundskeeper, and on the grounds I take care of, there is a cemetery, and it's a veteran cemetery. It started off as a women's relief corps, so there's a lot of history there. There's graves that date back to like 1906 and stuff like that. And when I got the job that I had now, it was not in great shape. Like things were tipping over and all of that, and the stones were all dirty and kind of gross. So I spent an entire summer just straightening everything out, cleaning them all up, and I made a modern map of them. I used Excel spreadsheet, got every single name, all the dates, all of that. So if someone was coming like, hey, my relative is buried there, I could like, let's look that up real quick, and I can tell you what row, where they are, all of that. And there was a missing graves too, because the facility I work at, if someone were to pass away, and there's no one to claim the body, they would bury them there. And their local funeral director, if he wasn't reminded, would just sometimes forget. And if there's no family to remind him, he just would forget. So we'd have graves that are 40 years old that are unmarked. And, so I had to go through the map and kind of be like, okay, so this person's here, this person's here. And then once in a while, we'd have someone show up that's like, hey, my great grandmother was buried here. And we have a record that she was at the facility, but know where her grave is. So then you have to kind of do like some investigation, be like, okay, so we're seeing what, like the years that people died, when did she die? And then with graves, especially that old too, before they made vaults, there'll be a depression in the ground. And that's how we were able to basically tell, like, this is between these dates. There's a depression there. We got a stone, put it there. The family is very happy with that. And, it's like what we can do for an over 100-year-old grave. But I did actually have a story about this too, because there was one thing that happens with those old graves. Like I said, when the depression happens, it usually happens because the casket eventually fails over rotting.
I was actually going to ask about what causes
Yeah. So what happens is it rots over time. And when it drops, sometimes it'll go over time, but it's usually when something heavy goes over it. And for me, it's usually a lawnmower. It's happened twice now, where I'm going over a grave and all of a sudden the ground drops like 6 to 8 inches. And it's alarming, especially when you hear someone else doing it. Like we had a tree cut down and they brought some equipment in, and it just was over a grave enough that you could hear it crunch and pop. Like it was a ghastly sound, especially because you know what it is. But, it's unfortunate. And we usually do is just, put some dirt in there, plant some new grass over top of it and call it good. But it doesn't feel good when it happens, Yeah,
that is definitely the most horror author career I think, or job I think I've heard. So that's
yeah. The like little goth teenager of me would have loved it, but
Right. So then where do you find time to write? Are you more of a morning and evening person? What's it look like?
So typically at night when like my wife is asleep, my daughter's asleep, because I have a hard time writing if I can't completely focus on it. So usually it's when everyone in the house is to bed except for me, and I'm just sitting here in the dark, like typing away. And sometimes like some weeks I will not have enough time because my wife will have a hard time falling asleep. So then I'm, just hanging out with her for a little bit. Then we both end up falling asleep. Or sometimes if I'll have inspiration at work, I'll stop and I'll put a little something in like a Google Docs, document and all that, or type away something that on a break at work but it's typically almost all at night.
Do you see yourself as more of a pantser or a plotter?
Pantser completely, because my first novel, what failed was I plotted it to death, and I was never able to write anything because it was paralysis by analysis. I was get a chapter in and started writing the next chapter, like, oh, I need to mention this in the first chapter. Oh, I need to do that. And it doesn't work. So I have the loosest of outline. I have an idea, like, I want it to end this way. I want to include this in there somewhere, and the rest I'll just fill in as I go. And how I'll always write, especially a longer thing, is I'll have 2 documents, and I'll be just writing as I go. And then if an idea occurs to me to add something in earlier, I'll put it in the other document. And I'll be like, mention this at this point where this comes up, add this thing about this character. And when I go back through and I'll edit, I'll just weave that stuff in.
Gotcha. All right. So I enjoy asking this next question because it's like picking your favorite kid. But of all the books you've written, what is your favorite?
It's definitely the Howling Between Worlds, because it is the, the ghastly child of all the things that I love that usually don't go together. And, it's such a niche thing that, like I said, no one out there is really writing it. There's a couple books out there now besides mine that are like mecha books, but nothing mecha horror, especially cosmic horror. And, that's like, I love that. And I love going back to it, but I haven't been able to get like mecha short stories published as much. So that's where like a lot of my like kind of folk stuff and like stuff inspired by my job and all that kind of come in, which is basically all the Witch Moth stuff, all the short stories in there. Kind of, there's no giant robots in that, but that's my favorite, especially.
There's no cemetery giant robots coming in.
Not yet, but we'll see. But yeah, that's like, especially going back through it, doing the editing and all that for the audiobook, like it's like revitalizing. Like I kind of want to get back into this and like finish writing the sequel. And, so I'm just like, that's definitely my favorite, as much as probably like the Witch Moth is better written at this point now, because I've grown as a writer. And I definitely love all of that stuff too, but that one is definitely my favorite.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's usually, trying to pick the favorite is always, a hard one.
Yeah.
Who would you say are some of your biggest literary influences?
I would say Laird Barron is definitely a big one, because he likes to write the weird fiction, and he'll throw like weird sci-fi, weird fantasy into his collections. Like in his Swift to Chase collection, there's randomly like a 40K style sci-fi story through the perspective of like a mechanical dog, as him and his like ex-military veteran go to like assassinate a like some duke of a planet, and he'll go back and do his like random cosmic horror stuff. So like his range and like weirdness that he likes to throw into stuff, I absolutely love. Like his Isaiah Coleridge stuff, where it's like, like an ex-mafioso turned private detective, but also there's cosmic horror in there randomly thrown in. Like there's maybe a guy that has psychic powers, but it's, that like I love the subtlety of it. Definitely, like the Howling Between Worlds was written in the style of another one of my favorite series is Brian Lumley's Necroscope. So like he was a big influence on that, because that's another like completely weird fiction stuff wrote completely straight. Yeah, like I don't know, like a little bit of everything, I guess, but like definitely those two hit me the most.
Gotcha. Yeah, those I'm kind of saying anything that's typically mine. I've always kind of leaned towards the Poe and King and all that, but occasionally there's just those that are just things that are just kind of the writing where it seems like it's just out of left wing. It's like you feel like it's going to be something that's kind of very straight laced and straight and narrow. Then all of a sudden it's like, wait, what happened? It's like, where did that come from? Yeah.
Like the Expanse, the first book was kind of like that, because I didn't know anything about it. It was just one of those ones that's like someone recommended, like, hey, read this. And I remember getting to a certain point, and there's literally a line like, and that's when the zombies appeared. And it's like, okay, this was,
what now?
I had to reread it again. I'm like, okay, I guess we're going there now,
It's always great.
Yeah.
All right. So let me see. Let me look through my list of questions here. All right. If you could pick someone to do a collaboration with, who would it be?
Oh God. Like anyone out there writing?
Anybody.
Okay. So I'd probably do Laird Barron because he's like my all-time favorite. I love everything he's written. But a more out there one is probably Hideaki Anno, who has done like he's most famous for his Evangelion anime series, but he also dabbles in a lot of other stuff. But you can always tell what he's done because he has references to other things, to certain literary styles, certain like framing things, and like all of his stuff is from like trauma that he's had. And, it comes from like a deep well of depression. Like Evangelion resonates with a lot of people because it's a very good depiction of like depression, especially for like a young person. And, like I've suffered with mental health stuff here and there. And I feel like we could make some sort of horrible monstrosity that would definitely wreck anyone who reads it. And, I think I would like to emotionally devastate people as much as possible. I think that'd be fun.
Spoken as a true horror author.
Yeah.
What can I do to emotionally wreck people?
Yeah.
I think that's what we all every morning when we sit down to write. That's I think the first thing I'm going to print that and just tape it onto my monitor. What can I do to emotionally wreck somebody today?
Yep. Yeah. He does it well. And like Evangelion, it's a giant robot fighting like aliens anime, and it goes some really weird places and a lot of crazy drama. Like, like when you start watching it versus the end, it's two completely different things.
You're like, how did we get here?
Yes. All of his stuff is like that. Like he did Shin Godzilla, and like that's probably one of the best, most horrifying Godzilla movies. And like he uses trains and stuff to like help take it down, like because it's completely from the bureaucracy of the government handling it. It's not some hero. It's not anything like that. It's this one guy who has an office job who's like, how can we handle this? Let's do press conferences. Let's do that. And it's all about how they handled the Fukushima disaster. But it's, again, like it ends in a completely different place than you think it would.
That's awesome. All right. So I started the Night Crew podcast as a spinoff of my own series, The Night Crew, which is about a team of monster hunters. So, all of my scripted episodes, I've been doing deep dives into some kind of a creature. I actually just finished wrapping up one on vampires I was doing. So with that being said, I told you a caveat coming on the show. You got to tell me about your favorite horror, your favorite monster, and you got to talk a little bit about it. So spill the beans. What's your favorite?
I wish I had a more like obscure literary answer, like, oh, the Chichen Itza monster from Aztec lore, or the, whatever else. But you did an episode on it, and I hate to admit it because I always felt like I was like above that nonsense. But I love vampires.
Vampires are so awesome.
And I
think get about vampires. I'm good with that.
Yeah, and it's I came to the realization like where I just think I accepted it, and it was when I started reading Empire the Vampire last year. Because I was like, I kept seeing it come around as kind of a grimdark fantasy, which I like, that had horror elements. And I'm like, yeah, but it's vampires, and they're kind of cheesy. And then I like kind of looked at my collection of books and the things I love, and I'm like, yeah, but the evidence is mounted against me. And I love unique vampire stories too. So like one of the earliest ones that I've read that completely blew me away was The Passage by Justin Cronin. And that it's again, I like stories that start at A and end up somewhere else. That's very much that one. I had a very good librarian when I went to school who was like, read this book, trust me. And she had not guided me wrong once, and that was one of them. Blew me away. Did not expect it to be a vampire story at all, and that's what it ended up being. But I just love the unconventional vampires. Like Brian Lumley's Necroscope stuff is very cosmic horror vampire in a completely unreal way that most other people haven't written. Empire the Vampire is fantastic. Like, I don't know why I was thinking I was above that. It's completely ate it up. Like,
as long as you're not into like the Twilight stuff, then we're okay. So
yeah, we got into that a little bit before the podcast, but yeah. that's definitely I love the response to it. I guess it definitely made a certain thing, and then people were like, ugh, let's do the complete opposite.
Yeah. Well, I think as we're filming this, one of the last episodes that dropped, I think it was the last episode of the vampire series I did, was all about vampires in Hollywood. And I talk about Twilight because, it's like, it had its purpose and it had its moment, and it introduced such a new audience to reading and to horror. I put horror in quotes.
Yeah.
But at least to those kind of, those characters, we won't get into the whole vampires don't sparkle, but, which they don't, but it introduced, a whole new generation of readers to those kind of creatures.
Yeah.
And so it had its purpose. And I even joked that in the last episode, I was like, it's okay to give Twilight crap. It made $1 bazillion. It can take it. It's. But all right. So with vampires, so do you like more the? Let me back up. So if you had to pick your favorite vampire movie, what was your favorite? What would?
Oh God. I definitely loved. Yeah. What is it? With the kids that moved to Virginia, I can't think of its name all of a sudden. It's basically Peter Pan, but with vampires. It was like an 80s movie. This is going to turn into one of those things where people are screaming at their device.
Yeah, I know.
Lost Boys. Lost Boys.
That's Santa Clara. That's not Virginia.
Yes. Was it Virginia? I don't remember. But anyways, yeah, that one.
It was, I think Santa Clara was supposed to be set in, because Santa Clara technically is Santa Cruz. So, because it was actually filmed in Santa Cruz.
Oh, okay.
I actually ran into, a little local bar that I go to, I have a Lost Boys t-shirt and I was wearing it there the other day.
Yeah.
And she was like, I grew up where they filmed that. I was like, Santa Clara is not a real place. She was like, no, it's Santa Cruz is where they filmed it. I was like, okay, yeah, I know that. She was like, yeah, they actually have a bridge there that they call the Lost Boys Bridge because it's the bridge in the movie that they hang off of. And yeah. So they call it Lost Boys Bridge. And I was like, that's kind of awesome.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so yeah, Lost Boys is my favorite vampire movie as well.
Yeah, it was definitely because it was creepy but fun, and that me, like, I enjoyed that early on. I really liked. God, there's a handful of them I really liked. I don't know if you can call it vampire too much, but Kronos by Guillermo del Toro. That was a really unique take of it. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed his Strain.
I was thinking the Strain was also a very unique take on the vampire mythos and the worms and Now the television series, they took it like a little. It didn't go as in depth into some of it as the book series. I don't know if you've read the book series or not on it, but
I read the first one and I need to read the rest. But
yes, eagle eye people can kind of see it back here behind me somewhere. But because I have all three of them there. But the books get they do get very religious in that all of the ancients were actually like fallen. They're pieces of an angel that got torn apart. And so as when the big explosion happened, and it takes their ashes to kind of I'm not going to give spoilers for it, but it does get all very, very religious in some of its overtones, especially in the later in the second and the third one. The TV series didn't get much into that.
They're on my list.
Yeah, I do recommend, especially if you enjoyed the first one, then definitely grab the second third one, because they're really good.
Yeah. So, I have them physically, and I unfortunately cannot. I don't have time to read physical books as much. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so they'll probably be on my audiobook feed here soon.
Yeah, I do as well. Highly recommend those. Now, so one thing, with you're talking about Lost Boys. So to me, what made part of it so great is, it wasn't, you kind of step away from like in the 70s when you had all like the Hammer films and, you had those kind of vampires. Then you get into the 80s and it was like vampires meet MTV, and you had, everything's leather and motorcycles, and, it was that whole, like that whole little genre of it, that's between that and you had like Fright Night, and that came shortly after. So definitely when it comes to vampires, I can geek out on some vampires, that's for sure.
Yeah. And, like another one was Daybreakers. I really enjoyed that one for its kind of like reversal on the whole thing. I liked I Am Legend, the movie, and then read the book, and then was like, okay, that's a different thing. Because they're in the book, they were way more like actual vampires, where the movie, they're just monsters more or less, but
Yep.
yeah,
So what would you say is your favorite vampire book?
and audiobooks. And it's hard to get an audiobook when you're indie, but
So listeners, I was behind me is all my books as well as the ones I've written at the top, and so as he was thinking, I was like pointing at the Night Crew. So so for any listeners, I was giving him a little crap.
Visual gag for an audio audience.
Yeah, I know it doesn't work as well.
Yeah, I got probably like a mixture of like The Passage, Necroscope, and like my recent favorite is Empire the Vampire. It was a unique take on it that I really enjoyed. I've like my favorite books is always shifting depending on my mood and like what I've read recently and that kind of stuff. But yeah, that like I really really liked Empire the Vampire because of how apocalyptic it was, but also kind of a medieval setting where it has like the whole religious undertones and all of that. But I don't know. It's everything about it. I liked like how monstrous they were because there's the mixture of like the svelte, like very fancy vampire kind of, like, oh, I'm here to seduce your women kind of vampire versus the, like I'm going to eat your children kind of vampire. And then, there's like kind of the like anime-esque, like over the top, like skilled like guys. Like there's one guy that has like a massive sword and he calls it Epitaph, like, and they get into like him battling with a sword that is bigger than his body and like actually kind of makes sense on how he uses it and all that. Like, that's a very anime thing of just like the stupid giant sword. So like love that. Especially how he like, because in anime it's like, oh, this guy has a big sword. They never acknowledge the fact that this guy has a big sword. It's just that's his sword. And there's a whole like process of like because their strain of vampires are like super strong, but they're also like subject to gravity. So like when they swing a big sword, instead of like trying to swing a sword like back and forth, there's so much of that I love. The Brian Lumley stuff, like again, like it almost doesn't read like a vampire book at first because it's very much like espionage, like like Cold War, fighting the Russians, using paranormal stuff, and then it's like, oh, there's this existential threat besides the Russians. It's actually ancient alien vampires that can shapeshift, and
Yeah. All right. So another question I have. So why horror?
Oh God, because I started writing science fiction horror with my first book, and the science fiction community, they're very like, I don't know. I couldn't get into that community very well. It was almost like a little too like pretentious in a way, at least when I tried to get into it. And horror is not as much, especially like the indie horror community. And because they're writing wild stuff and, some of the wildest concepts I've ever heard. I'm like, I love that. Like it's great. Not my taste at all, but I'm glad someone else made it. So, like I also feel like you can express a lot of emotional depth and you can do a lot of commentary through horror because there's a lot of things that you can't really get an emotional response out of in other ways. So you can tackle like in my style I tackle transhumanism, religious oppression, and trauma all through horror, and you can do that in a lot of creative ways where people might not even realize what you're looking at until like they're thinking about it, like, oh, this is what you're kind of writing about. And like that's the kind of stuff I write. Other people are writing like splatterpunk and all of that, and some stuff is not as deep, and that's perfectly fine. Like B horror stuff is fun, and
Yep, very true. So outside of things like sci-fi horror, do you have another favorite kind of subgenre of horror?
I love like medieval fantasy horror, and it's not something that's around a lot, but I love when horror interjects into something that's not usually horror. So like, I was a big video gamer. I still like video games a lot now, but I obviously don't have the time. But like my favorite stuff was always like when you're playing a game and it's like, oh, there's the horror level or there's the horror area. So like Half-Life 2, like there's a whole town like Ravenholm where that's like the whole horror level where it's zombies and monsters, all that. Like in like Oblivion and Skyrim, like there's whole areas of that where you're like, oh, you're fighting monsters, and all of a sudden like you're like, oh, this is like a very scary section of this area, and then you're out of it again. Or probably my very first was Zelda Ocarina of Time, when like the sun goes down, the little monsters come out. And, but like
I kept waiting for you to say Castlevania.
But like I love unexpected horror, and unfortunately you can't always do that when writing a book, because people like to know what they're getting into. So you can't be like, this is a sci-fi book, and then it turns horror halfway through. That's going to completely alienate people. So you kind of have to market it as like, oh, this is sci-fi and horror, or this is this, and So, but fantasy horror like is something that there needs to be more of. Like I love Between Two Fires. That was phenomenal. I love the movie Headhunter. Like stuff like that. It's there needs to be more of it, and that's part of why I liked Empire the Vampire too.
Now there is some of that, like you get into this like grim dark stuff. It kind of definitely kind of borderlines that, where it can be fantasy, but it also could be horror. It has like that kind of middle realm that it kind of likes to tread. Yeah,
that's one thing I really like about R. Scott Baker's Second Apocalypse series, is that there's a whole cosmic horror aspect of that is kind of floating over the whole first 3, 4, 5 books. That kind of shows up a little bit, but then like the last 2 books is like they full on like horror through most of it. And like it's a fantasy world where there's magic, sorcery, all of that, very grimdark, very bleak. But there's like the big enemy, kind of like the White Walkers in Game of Thrones, but instead of it being a magical entity, it's not Sauron. They never explicitly say what it is, but it's aliens. Like there's aliens that landed, that there's a big war over, like that was the first apocalypse, and they never finished the job. There's still something called the Ark that's way over there at Golgotharoth, and it kind of influences things sometimes through, like, they call them the consult. They're like influence all that. There's a whole like section of like mages that are like supposed to battle them, but they're kind of like, oh, they're over there. They're not really a problem. Some of it's myth. But when they start getting into it, in the way they're describing what's happening, and like they call like their technology and all that, they call it the techne, the forbidden science. And this is like, stuff from them. And as you get in, like the way they're describing stuff that happens, you're like, that's a laser beam that just killed a bunch of people. Or like they just found a nuke. Like, but it's all through that fantasy lens, and like there's nothing else really out there like it. And it's also very dense, like it's very prosy and all of that a lot of people are like, and it's also extremely bleak. So but like I said, there needs to be more of that. Like I'm trying to work on something myself, but
as a writer, we can't really say there needs to be more of it, but then we're not writing it. So yeah, I was gonna say, if you think there needs to be more of it, then
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. And with mine too, because whenever I try to do a big project, I always try to be too ambitious with it. So like I'm native Puerto Rican, I'm Taino. And like a lot of fantasy stuff is kind of like, oh, it's like Europe, medieval Europe, fantasy setting. And I'm like, well, what if we do it from like the viewpoint of like a native people when Columbus showed up? Like that's how I was like kind of formulating mine, of being like, kind of crusades, kind of conquistador showing up to a new nation, but infusing horror in that, like, so I'm reading like, research papers written in the 90s about Taino culture and all that, to trying to interject that in there. And, like I said, when I do something, I overdo it. But so it's probably something I'm not going to actually start writing for a few months, but it's coming.
Good. All right. So with that, I guess, where can my listeners be able to find out more about Eric?
Well, I've got a website. It's EM Otero, author.com. I do a lot of my social media. I've been trying to do more like writing related stuff, because I love photography. I love taking pictures of bugs and stuff like that. So it's usually like, see like a praying mantis or whatever other thing on there, and then some stuff on my books. But I'm on Instagram, EM Otero author. I'm on Facebook, same thing. I do have a Patreon page that I'm trying to put like sneak peek stuff and other stories that I can't seem to get published anywhere. Put them on there. Like I have a whole like mecha novella on there, the final arc that releases episodes. But I also have a page on my Patreon where I have put links to everything I published, that's short story wise and novel wise. So like you can go there, you can find my stuff I've written for Creepy, my different anthologies that I've been in, all that. So you find that page, everything's there.
Awesome. Okay. Well, and I'll make sure I get all those links from you, so that way I can put them in the show notes. So all the links to where folks can find you will be there. Other than that, any lasting words before we bid adieu?
Not college educated or anything. Very blue collar. Was just a reader and was like, you know what? There needs to be a book about this, and I put it down and started doing it.
Yep. It's definitely great advice. It doesn't take much. I see a lot of people who they're like, oh, you have to have the MFA and all that. No, you don't. I don't have any of that. It just takes wanting to sit down and do it, and just having a story to tell.
Correct. If you want to write, just do it. Just because if you get it down on words, like there was someone on a Reddit post that was like, I don't know, should I plot? Should I do this? I have 90,000 words of my story. I'm like, you got that much, you're fine. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it,
Right. Yeah, not everybody's process works the same. And, I know people who are like, well, Stephen King says he writes 6 pages a day, so I need to write 6 pages a day. No, you're not Stephen King. That may not be what works for you. You need to do what works for you. I was on a panel at the Texas AuthorCon, and somebody's asking about, what it was kind of a process kind of question. And I said, you could sit there and try to say, my goal is I have to write 500 words a day. But if you're not in the mindset to write 500 words, then tomorrow you're deleting 498 words. So did you do any good?
Yeah.
It's you have to find the process that works for you.
Yeah, and like I feel like even if you write those 499 words that aren't good, like it's still a part of the process. Like just writing, like just write and read. Like you can tell when people write that don't read. It's very obvious, especially when I was doing like beta reading for people and stuff. Like I swapped books with people, and there was one person that was like, I don't think you can do that in a book, something I did. And I'm like, yeah, whatever you want to do, like you can do, and like, well, I don't really read. And I was like, okay, right?
Well, let's start there.
Yeah. Just like read a lot of different things, whatever you want to read, like whatever you want to write, read in that genre, and it'll come to you. Just practice.
Yep. All right. Well, it was a pleasure having you on, and again, so we'll put all your links in the show notes, and that way people can find you. So with that, again, I appreciate you being on.
Of course, it was a pleasure being on.
Thanks.
That's it for the Night Crew podcast and my conversation with Eric Otero. I have links to where you can find Eric in the show notes. Follow him on all the socials and pick up his books. So, if you had a good time, make sure to follow the show, share it with a friend, and leave a rating. Hopefully, 5 stars. If you want updates on my writing, you can follow me on Facebook or TikTok at BradRicksAuthor. You can find copies of my novels wherever you like to buy books. But if you hop over to my website, bradricks.com, you can purchase signed copies of any of my novels. While there, also sign up for my newsletter. Remember, Night Crew Book 1 is currently available. Book 2 comes out November 14th. I'm Brad Ricks, reminding you to stay out of graveyards after dark, question people who don't show up in mirrors, and yes, okay, I'm jealous. I want to work in a cemetery. Until next time, keep your curtains drawn, your sense of humor sharp, and your blood inside your body. Thanks for listening.